Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Just to start us off, my name is Peggy, and I proudly lead the Ruby. So to tell us a little bit about who we are, the Ruby is a collective and a safe gathering space for women and non-binary creatives. We are dedicated to learning and creating together in a community of support. And if you are able, we would also be incredibly grateful for any donation to help us continue our work and our cultural and public programming. There's a Venmo with a QR code and a jar for cash if you'd like to contribute. Whatever you can is always appreciated. And I also wanted to share about this space with you. So the space you're in right now, this is our work and gathering space. This is a space for us to feel safe, to come together, and we welcome you, and we hope you can feel the love and support that we do while we're here together. And we also ask for your help in keeping this space, one that's very precious to us, a safe space, and not to share our address publicly and with others who are not RSVP to this event. That would be really appreciated. Also, some housekeeping. The restroom, if you haven't seen it, is right around the corner. So if you walk through this hallway and make a left, you'll see the restroom. And you'll also see a lot of delicious food that Jenny actually generously brought with her. And wine. You'll also see our holding pattern original cocktail. And you came into the holding pattern playlist, so we have a lot of great themes here today. And also, we're just really grateful to have this opportunity to work with Green Apple. Green Apple has been an incredible dream collaborator, especially working with Car. So just really grateful to have this opportunity, and also grateful to share this time with Jenny Shia and also Shruti, who's a beloved Ruby member. Thank you so much, everyone who are joining us, and I'm going to pass the mic to Car Johnson.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple Books here in San Francisco. I'm delighted to be back at the Ruby, working once again with our literary besties at the Ruby here. Thank you so much to the Ruby members for welcoming our audience into this beautiful space today. And thank you, as always, to Peggy Lee for making this space so special. Thank you. Let's give a hand for Peggy. Very brief housekeeping of my own. We're gathered this evening on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land, and we hope that you join us in our pledge to turn land acknowledgement into action by donating either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization each time you hear, or in my case, speak a land acknowledgement. We have copies of our authors' books available for purchase, and there will be a signing line to follow. It's a great way to support your local independent bookstore and also artists that you love and care deeply about. So if you are able, we always appreciate when you can buy books from us. Thank you also for gathering here to celebrate Jenny tonight. We're in wonderful company this evening, and we have two great authors joining us and a good conversation ahead of us. We are, of course, big fans of Shruti, so thank you for giving your time to Jenny's novel and for being here with us. And I am over the moon that Jenny is here back in the Bay, and congratulations on this novel, and thank you for letting us celebrate with you. It's very exciting. So I have brief bios for both of these writers so you know a little bit about them. First, Shruti Swamy is the author of the story collection A House is a Body and the novel The Archer. She's the recipient of a creative writing fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as grants from the Elizabeth George Foundation, the San Francisco Arts Council, and Vassar College. She is a Kundiman Fiction Fellow and lives here in San Francisco. Let's give one more hand for Shruti Swamy. And last but most certainly not least, Jenny Shia is a writer and editor living in Brooklyn. Originally from Shanghai, she graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, and earned her MFA at Johns Hopkins University. Her work has appeared in Joyland, Narrative, and Best of the Net Anthology, among other places. Jenny is the recipient of a Breadloaf Scholarship and fellowships from McDowell, Yaddo, and other places as well. She's a contributing writer for Architectural Digest, Apartment Therapy, and Dwell, where she was the executive editor. Jenny is also one of the National Book Foundation's 2023 5 Under 35 honorees. And There's only 5 of them, and one of them is here. And her novel, Holding Pattern, is the reason we are here tonight, so let's give one more hand for Jenny Shields.
Wow. I already feel like I can't continue because I'm too emotional. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Peggy, for opening this space. The Ruby, it's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Car and Green Apple Books, for being here. And thank you, Shruti, of course, for doing this with me. And love your brain. And love that I get to talk to your brain and you, Holy, for this event. And yeah, I'm just so grateful, and everyone here. I mean, so many of you made this possible. I really don't say that lightly. You've made me who I am and what this book is. So it means so much to see you here. All right, I'm just gonna start with reading a little bit from the book, like 5 pages. This will be a scene where Kathleen, the main character, is trying out essentially for her professional cuddling job at the startup called Midas Touch. And she is, let's see, what else do you need to know? The person facilitating this like cuddle interview is this person named Nadia. And you also need to know that Kathleen's ex is named Oren. And this will bring up some memories with Oren. I think that's it. I couldn't put it into words. The eeriness of commodifying intimacy, the company's willfully cheerful answer to the urgent and pervasive loneliness of existence. Studies on the psychological benefits of touch were sparse, and questions around ethics stayed the hands of caretakers, doctors, and therapists. Midas Touch seemed poised to satisfy a primal need, but what about the ethics of privatizing touch at all? In the end, profit would be the only metric that mattered. Despite their breathless DEI statement and inclusive brand identity, Midas Touch was tailored to a privileged, urban, tech-savvy few. It's very regulated, I finally said lamely. Oh, absolutely. Everything's been streamlined to feel as safe and comfortable as possible. Nadia unlocked a door with a string of numbers and held it open to let me pass. Here, a low platform bed took up most of the space, draped with a fringe coverlet, and a slim leather couch hugged one wall. A wooden coffee table held a brass tray of melted candles and a singed nub of Palo Santo in a marble bowl. Go ahead, have a seat, said Nadia. She took her place on the couch, then leaned over to wedge a finger into the back of her sneakers. We just asked that shoes stay off the furniture. Unsettled by the sudden familiarity in the room, I stepped out of my flats and sat beside her, maintaining a cushion's width of distance. So the first thing I want to point out, said Nadia, is that there's a camera in every room that monitors the session. This is just to ensure that everyone is complying with the Midas method, which, as you know, includes cuddling, conversation, and companionship, but is completely non-sexual. She gestured to the white camera mounted in a corner. If you feel uncomfortable in any way, it's your right to terminate the session, and that'll flag the user in our system for a follow-up with the safety team. 9 times out of 10, that will result in them being permanently banned. Not that it happens very often, less than 1% of the time to be exact. She flashed a reassuring smile. Do you have any questions before we begin? The misgivings I had were jumbled in an impossible knot. I shook my head. Okay, feel free to let me know if anything pops up. Otherwise, how about we start with you showing me the armchair? The Midas method included a guide to cuddling positions that range from basic poses like spooning to more elaborate choreography. Start with something simple, the training had advised, and let the rest come naturally. Feel free to incorporate stimulating movement like back rubs and head scratches with the consent of the client, checking in periodically to make sure you're both comfortable and relaxed. I'd studied the illustration for the armchair, recognizing it as the way Oren would often hold me. He lying on his side with his knees bent at a right angle, I resting on my back with my legs hooked over his as though in a seat. I guided Nadia to the bed and into the pose, suppressing a laugh at the strangeness of our bodies connecting so unceremoniously as though we were models performing for a camera. My arms encircled her shoulders as she settled into my lap, and I could feel the warmth and give where her breasts began, and I smelled coconut shampoo. "Are you comfy?" I asked, hoping she couldn't feel my sputtering heart. This is nice. Are you?" "Yep." I cleared my throat to stifle a cough. I waited for further instruction, but it did not come. 30 seconds passed, then a minute. I marinated in my own self-consciousness until it deepened and metastasized into a kind of horror. To disperse the feeling, I tried to think about the science of what was happening. The unmyelinated, C-tactile fibers in the skin responding to tenderness, the insular cortex of the brain processing sweetness. While I labored, Nadia was breathing deeply, letting the air graze the back of her throat so that she emitted a light snore, and I wondered if she was falling asleep. I closed my eyes. I focused on the rise and fall of her body pressing into mine. Gradually, my thoughts lost their rigidity, began to drift. I became less aware of time and more aware of the heat coalescing between us, my consciousness sinking until it was a small, eyeless seed within a broadening galaxy of flesh, bone, blood, nerve, steady and alive. It felt like a meditation, a color dawning inside my head. Apparitions of sound and image ballooned and dissolved, forming a diaphanous tunnel that transported me back. The tick of a car signal, windshield wipers clearing a swirl of snow, Oren's hands climbing over the wheel as we cruised left, the tires dragging through slush on the road. I was telling him about Brian. Brian is her mom's new boyfriend. I was telling him about Brian, how flushed my mother sounded on the phone. Maybe they were taking things too fast. He glanced at the directions, the blue line charting our path. I think I turned too soon. That's okay, we're close, I think. I cleared a patch of fog on the window and watched it regain its milky opacity. Did you hear me? I'm wondering if she's going to get hurt. Have there been any red flags? Other than an alien abducting my mother and replacing her with a freaky clone? No. Can you imagine Marissa running? What's so bad about her wanting to be more active? It's not bad, it's just... I arced against the seat, stretching my back. It's alarming. It's like everything she went through, that we went through, didn't count or matter. All she needed was to meet some dude. He patted my thigh. I'm sure it's jarring, but if she's happy, what's the point in overthinking it? Comfort, encouragement, Oren offered them readily, but he had a hard time acknowledging when things were off. He did this when I talked about Marissa, her mom, about school, about us, as though the troubles of my life could seep into and taint his. It was because he saw my life fundamentally as a reflection of his own, a shadow that couldn't survive without its counterpart. It was lonely to trudge through my doubts, though at the time I dismissed them as my own insecurity and anxiety. The truth is, my body had sensed the relationship straining before the breakup. Oren and I had stopped touching each other. The sex was still there, but not the palm caressing my lower back as he passed me in the kitchen, not the sardine squeeze of our bodies stretched across the couch. We fell asleep with just our ankles intertwined, and I would wake up huddled on one side with the covers while he lay exposed in the dark. These were inches that felt like miles, the negative space between us like runes we'd refused to decipher. Nadia sighed and shifted, and I miraculously moved with her, and we nestled facing each other with my chin buried in her hair. I felt as though I'd landed a dazzling gymnastic maneuver, but it had come naturally. My body had known what to do.
It's all now.
I'm so sorry. I tried to post on...
That was perfectly timed. That was the last line.
Thank you so much for that reading, Jenny.
that I think maybe if many of you haven't yet read this book, you'll see from that reading why I'm so excited to talk to Jenny today, because just in that little bit, there's so much. This is a novel that's like both bristling with ideas, and also it's an incredibly embodied book. It is a book about touch, and it is a book about like physical, really a sense of physicality. So I was actually going to start with a different question, but since you read that wonderful passage, I thought that I would I wanted to start with the body. This in that reading, you said Kathleen says, my body knew before my mind did that this relationship was over. There's this way in which there's another wonderful line that sort of stuck with me where she says, I dropped into my body like an anvil. That there's these ways that when she's in these cuddling sessions, there's a lot of stuff going on in her head, and yet her body is responding in a really specific way. This is a very embodied and grounded book, and I wanted to ask you where that impulse for you started and how you get into that space, because it is a deeply physical, it's a very tactile book.
Oh, thank you for that question. I'm going to start by not answering the question, I guess, but talking a little bit, about, bodily wisdom or bodily knowledge. And I feel like there's something very urgent about this period that we're living in, that's really pressurized, that forces us to dissociate for much of our daily lives, or maybe that's just me, but there's just so much input, and so much of the input is debilitating that I feel like the only way to really go about your day is to choose when and when not to be present, because if you were fully taking in everything that goes on around you, it'd be, I don't know, that's crushing. But I think the cost of that is that you also lose a lot of the feeling and knowledge that I feel like is really intuitive, and it is really deeply embodied. And that's something that we express in language, right? When you say oh, I felt it in my gut, or we're going to feel it out, or let's keep in touch, or that person is touchy. All these metaphors are about knowing through body, but for some reason we've really divorced physical knowledge, physical intuition, and severed that from intellectual knowledge or cognition. But everything in the body is intertwined, and that's really harmful to separate the two. So to get into the book, I think so Kathleen in the book is getting her PhD in cognitive psychology. And so her field of study is haptics, so the study of touch, but she is coming at touch from a very intellectual ivory tower way, where she's looking at people and how texture will affect how quickly they solve a puzzle. And but she is at this rupture in her life where she breaks up with this person that she thought she was going to marry. She's, not sure if she wants to continue in this PhD program. She goes back home, and so she's totally shaken up. And then I was like, okay, well, how do you get her back into knowing herself and being true to herself? Maybe she approaches touch in a whole different way. So whereas her studies were very cerebral, very removed, I wanted to explore touch in the most physical way possible. So actually holding and cuddling strangers. And you'll find in the book that it helps her think about everything. Her way of being in the world, but also her way of relating to the world and the people that she loves, with her relationships, romantic relationships, but most pointedly also with her mom.
That is a wonderful segue to my next question. So this book actually opens with a kind of wonderful reversal in that a mother and daughter are going wedding dress shopping, and the shop assistant assumes that it is the daughter who's getting married, and it is revealed that it's in fact the mother who's getting married, and they're shopping for the daughter's like maid of honor dress, and this is a series of reversals. Like there's as we get a little deeper into the novel, we start to understand that this is a very difficult relationship between this mother and daughter, that the mother went through a period of intense depression and alcoholism, and the daughter, Kathleen, was acting as a caretaker to her. We're seeing that like what might have looked like a happy family and a functional marriage absolutely was not. And we're also seeing in another, that there's also these wonderful friends that are part of Kathleen's life who also in some ways are her family or her chosen family too. So there's all these ways in which things are not quite what they seem in this book. And I was wondering if you wanted to talk about the tension of that, what's happening on the surface of these relationships and what's like kind of bristling up against what's going on underneath.
Yeah, I love that. The mother-daughter reversal, I think, is one major trope that sort of plays throughout the book, starting with this wedding where, Kathleen was in this very serious relationship, and she thought at this point of her life, they'd already talked about getting married, they looked at rings, he had like hinted that he knew how he was going to propose, so it was really there. And again, right, she's existing within the track we all exist in, especially as women, to like follow a certain thing and do certain things by a certain time. So she has a lot of pressure on her, and that all gets taken away from her, and she thinks she's going to go home and at least have the comfort of her mom, dreary as she is, to kind of like wallow and eat Ben and Jerry's. But yeah, her mom is not like that at all. She's, about to get married to this tech entrepreneur and has completely flipped a switch. She's rock climbing and drinking green juice and doing all the Bay Area things. So it's she not only doesn't get to have comfort, she's now again put in the role of being the caretaker. And I think that's a really complicated, in itself already a really complicated dynamic, but then you add the wedding, the pressures of a wedding into that. And that was really fun to play with. Never having planned a wedding, but having gone to marthastewart.com and looked at the timeline of what you should be doing, it was nice to have that scaffolding. I was like, okay, what should I write about now? Okay, now they should be tasting cakes. So like, I liked having that as like beats already in a, those are already beats that I could play with, and then that would be like the moments where they collide, like them trying to work it out. But you also mentioned, the friends aspect, and I think there's something about like chosen family that is really resonant in my life and also in Kathleen's life. Because she has such a small family experience, right? Just her and her mom. Her dad has kind of like left the family when she's very young. She has this like really intense, almost like distilled sense of family in just her mom, which I think is communicate by now is hard, it's fraught. So to get breathing room outside of that, she turns to her friends, and a part of that is these are people who literally speak her language, meaning English, whereas her mom speaks mostly Mandarin. But also like have the same there's just like a level of like not having to explain herself that I think she finds in her friends LB and Andrew that she doesn't have in her family. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that was wonderful. I think one of the primary pleasures of this novel is that you've got these threads that are so surprising, and you've woven them together. Like we have this incredibly complex and tender relationship between a mother and daughter navigating a new chapter in their lives. We have this whole exploration of cuddling and haptics and the power of touch and the complications of that. We also have an influencer rat named Milo, Milo, and and there's a variety of delights in that, the ways that your brain put those together. So it just was such an unexpected, like I felt like there were so many ways that this is a very realist book that takes place in a very familiar world, and is also like full of these wonderful delights and is exploring some of these like new pockets that we might not have access to. So I just wanted to hear, like, where did those threads start weaving themselves together into this book for you?
Sarah, where's my agent, Sarah? She helped so much with that. I started writing this in 2015, 2016, sort of with the intention of it being a book, but mostly to explore these mother-daughter characters, and I thought it was going to be a collection of linked stories. And then I realized I don't know how to do that. It seems like it'll be easier, but I actually think it's way harder. But my approach was just to throw everything in there, and sort of like set all these little like wind-up toys in motion and like let them collide, and maybe something interesting would happen. But there was a lot going on, and Sarah did a great job over the years of helping me identify like what's really resonant, what are the core things, and then how can we start like bringing everything together so they start talking to each other. So the rat influencer who's trying to be Luke, the rat owner, is trying to like make a living off this rat influencer. Like, how can we connect that thematically into the book, right? And it is still like a reflection of just like, social media and connection. I think the book is also asking a lot about like authenticity, because in the cuddling, it like brings up all these questions of like, okay, what does intimacy mean, and can something be really intimate if there's no romantic vector in it, and but can you still have feeling? So there's a lot in the book I think about authenticity that social media, and especially just the Bay Area, Silicon Valley setting in general, kind of looks at, because it's set sort of like right as big tech is happening. So people are having to reckon with the commodification of not just touch, but like attention and connection and personal brand. Like personal brand was not a thing that existed or anyone said in 2009.
And also, like Kathleen probably worked with like lab rats, or that feels like a lab rat to then just this like celebrity rat, like a fun leap.
Right, exactly. She was chopping off rat heads before, which I heard, this might not be true. Someone told me that they had to do that to kill their lab mice. They had to cut off their heads with scissors. I'm so sorry.
Lab mice?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really intense.
So she was doing that, and then she has to, be this like rat's like, what's it called, posse?
Yeah, like PR.
She like goes to the convention center. She has to like go door to door and like sling this rat.
I think there's something, especially it struck me as you were reading how funny it is that this tech company is named Midas Touch. It's sort of like, as you were reading, I was thinking about how ominous Theranos sounded now in retrospect. And it's like, it's kind of a creepy name for this.
What does Theranos mean?
Theranos, it's connected to the Greek word for death. It's like Theranos, I think. Anyways.
That makes sense.
It feels like a thing where it's like, it's like touch, it's good. It's like, this will make us money and also make you dead. It's like also kind of creepy. I think, and there's a number, at least there's one other, but I feel like there's even more ambient Jenny invented apps that feel very real in this book. And I do feel like this book is set in the Bay Area, it's set in the tech industry. That's another thread of this book. And there's kind of a low-key critique of that culture and what apps are doing, maybe what apps are doing, what social media is doing to us. Let me read my note on this to turn this into a question, not just an observation. Right, so there's like the entire act of like the apps are predicated on this idea of frictionlessness, and there's something kind of like absurd about trying to make an experience, a tactile human experience of cuddling frictionless when perhaps it even derives its pleasure from friction. So I was just wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about the apps and the tech world in your book and what you were thinking about as you were writing it, and particularly the idea of frictionlessness that really struck me. I mean, it's absurd because there's so many moments where that we're going off script in the cuddling sessions, and things that cannot be, that the app is trying to solve for actually just can't be solved by an app.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah, frictionlessness. I mean, it's sort of like, I don't know, we've all seen this happen. Again, when I wrote this, Instagram didn't really exist. I mean, it existed, but not in the way it does now. And I remember I was kind of trying to keep up with the technology. Once Instagram stories were a thing, I was like, oh, how would this affect her day-to-day life? And at a certain point, I had to just let it go. I was like, I can't, there's no way I can fold TikTok into here. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the rapidity and the scale with which tech has completely subsumed our lives has been huge, monumental, and it's hard to grasp, and it's so slow. I feel that you remember how it's easy to forget how it was not part of your day-to-day. And what it's doing, I think, is just speeding up what already happens socially, but also in capitalism. I don't think that social media and apps in general really add anything new to what humans are already like. It's not oh, if we didn't have apps or social media, we wouldn't be like this and things would be better. I think it's part of our core, but what it does is it enables the good and the bad of our social fabric. And so it's sort of a double-edged sword. And so it just sort of reveals what you are at a faster rate. And then so it does that, and then it causes all this pressure and friction, and then it also becomes, then it packages itself as the solution too. So it's I don't know, Amazon, it's not an app, but as a example, as a sweeping example of tech coming in to destroy small businesses and the texture of communities. But then Square comes up and is I have an app for small businesses to stay alive. So it's just a weird thing of it's flattening everything, and then selling back to you this solution that's really pales in comparison to the problem. And what it's selling is this idea of hygienic, frictionless existence, that there's some app or there's some routine or there's some tool or some process that you can introduce into your life, and then everything would be better. And why haven't you figured it out yet, you dumb person? But yeah, so I mean, but I hope we all know that like that's not what we actually want, right? Like you actually don't want a frictionless existence. You don't want a totally optimized life, because what's the fun in that? I was, talking to my friend Isle. It was like, if you very quickly go from A to B in your life, like A is birth and B is death, like you know what the outcome is. Like it's not the point of getting there faster or more cleanly, it's in, having a life along the way. And there's something about like optimizing that I think can optimize all the joy out of that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I'm just going to read this next question because I'm feeling like I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do a good job unless I read it. Because I wanted to ask you, obviously, about cuddling. I have a lot of questions about cuddling. I think that I came into this book with a lot of assumptions about what cuddling is, and what you do with the subject is so fascinating because it's investigating this like weird liminal space that this work exists in. It's not sex work. It's very explicitly not sex work, but it's not sex work in a way that you sort of alluded to, where it's like it's deeply intimate physical work that is predicated on a kind of emotional intimacy. It can lead to kind of wilder, confusing emotional intimacy is not regulated currently. It can even be potentially dangerous. But at the same time, as you were mentioning, it's growing like an actual physical, like public health problem, which is an epidemic of loneliness that we are currently experiencing, especially in this country, and that not being touched is like can have really damaging effects on your health. Kathleen comes to this work as a graduate student in psychology who has studied the power of touch. And then she's like doing this like very on the ground, like lived experience of this work. So this is all just to say it's an incredibly complex subject that you have explored really wonderfully with so much sensitivity and respect. And I just wanted to ask you a very obvious question, which is what drew you to the subject? And can you talk about where you started to find that, okay, this is going to be part of the story, and where those contours led you in the story?
Yeah. I think it first came about when I first learned about it, which was in it doesn't matter, the year doesn't matter. I was in grad school, it was summertime, I needed a summer gig, and I was like scrolling through stuff, through jobs, and yeah, someone was looking for a professional cuddler to come work at their clinic. It was a physical clinic in Maryland, and at the time I was like, that's really interesting, fascinating, but then I didn't end up doing it. But I, put that in my back pocket, and then somehow, I don't know, I just gave it to Kathleen to explore. And I think as it sort of like revealed itself, I feel like we kind of talk about writing in these like magical terms, like it like reveals itself and the character comes, but like that's not actually what happens. But I don't know any other way to explain it.
That's how it happens.
Is that how it happens?
Yeah, well, it's like for me, writing is this thing where you're like suddenly at some point there's like a point where you're like, oh, this is a person. Now I feel like I'm talking about a person who actually exists, but you made that person up, and you.
But how?
I don't know. It is really magical, but I think it's like legitimate to talk about it like it's magic, because I think writing is magical.
Oh, thank you. I think so too. Well, I think there's something about maybe what I'm talking about with the point of like revealing itself, or like the character came, is like you try a bunch of things and they feel bad, and then you try something and it feels great, and you're like, okay, this is it. So at one point I tried Kathleen's Gonna Cuddle, and I was like, yeah. So that's how it came about. And then it sort of just led me down a rabbit hole where I was just thinking about touch for a very long time. And doing a lot of research on touch on a couple of different levels. One was like just reading neuroscience papers and cognitive psychology papers and learning about the cognition behind touch, like what does hedonic or like pleasurable touch do to the body or your brain, and how does it help you process information differently. I just read something where I talked about like C-tactile fibers. There are people in this room who can explain this better than I can, but those are like fibers that like do respond to like a very specific kind of touch, like a pleasurable touch. Like if you go too fast, too hard, like it doesn't respond. So your bodies are really like biologically engineered to crave good touch. I think we all know like some of the benefits. It lowers your heart rate and blood pressure. It increases oxytocin, helps you sleep, helps with pain. In your early development stages, if you don't have enough touch, it actually stunts your growth physically and emotionally. And then there's like the social aspect of touch that I was starting to learn about, and especially in the past couple of years, that was accelerated because we experienced the pandemic, and skin hunger, which is a term that Dr. Tiffany Field in the Miami Institute of Touch Research talks about, the Touch Research Institute at the University of Miami. It's a very, very biologically deeply seated need that we just don't have any sort of like infrastructure in our healthcare and our social groups really to provide just platonic touch, healing touch. And it used to be a lot more pronounced in care, just medical care, and now it's like very much de-emphasized. And then I did cuddling of my own to sort of like see what is it that Kathleen is experiencing with these strangers. Like, what is that like when you meet someone, then you cross this like taboo boundary? You're not supposed to touch even anyone's hair. Like, you're not even supposed to get that close to people. But what happens when you like cross that boundary with a complete stranger? And like, it is a very like complex as you say, not sex work, because it almost feels adjacent because it's just so intimate, and it's like when people talk about offering the girlfriend experience, like usually that costs more than actual sex because it's just so emotionally laborious, and you're really dealing with someone's humanity in a different way. But yeah, I found that all of that could be bound up and still have it be platonic. You can have this really pleasurable, intimate, physical experience and have it be platonic if you do the right frame setting.
Yeah. I have been alerted by a car that this is my last question until I open up for questions, but I have a lot more questions, so I will continue to ask them if there aren't any questions from the audience, but I'm sure there will be. So this book is as much about touch as it is about love. There's so many relationships in this book. There's so many romantic relationships of all kinds. You know, there's Kathleen and Orrin have just broken up, and Marissa and Brian, the mother, Marissa is marrying Brian, which seems like a wonderful relationship. There's a string of failed relationships with Marissa's first marriage has ended pretty disastrously. It started with a beautiful love story, and then we see all of her friends kind of struggling in their marriages. A lot of them have really painful stories or in very painful situations. And at the same time, and then we also have this really incredibly confusing and increasingly out of control relationship that Kathleen develops with one of her clients, which is starting to stray outside of the bounds that have been set by Midas touch. And then we also have these wonderful non-romantic relationships. Our two really closest friends who've been there through a lot of hard times because they're friends from, you know, high school or even middle school. I'm kind of asking this to you because when I met you, you were reading the Bell Hooks book, All About Love. And I just, you know, this is kind of a big, messy question. I just wanted to ask you about love a little bit. Like, that really feels like the heart of this book to me. And I wanted to ask you about what drew you to writing about it in so many diverse forms. Like, as I was thinking about this question, I was like, well, don't many novels center on relationships, but there is just something particular about Holding Pattern that really does seem to be about love too. And I wanted to ask you what drew you to writing about that or putting that at the center of your book.
I love that question. Thank you so much. That's so beautifully put. I love love. And it is true, I met Shruti in January. We were both at Log Haven, which is a writing residency in Knoxville. Highly recommend. Applications actually are open. Let me talk about romantic love, I guess, because that's also like at the core of this book. What I love about romantic love especially that is so fun to explore for me is just like this third entity that two people create that only exists for as long as these two people exist in relationship. And then once that, if it breaks or if they move on, then that third entity is gone. And also beyond that, like they, most of the time, can't find any solace in losing that third entity except in each other, and then each other are the only people they're supposed to not talk to. And like that's such a weird contract and thing that we live with. I don't know the thing about, yes, okay. And the other thing I wanted to say about love that I think sort of like undergirds everything that Kathleen is going through in terms of like feeling unmoored and feeling like she's not tethered to anything is that I feel like love is being known. And I was listening to Sharon Olds' poems recently, and there's a line, I'm going to butcher it, but it's something like, love is the love of who you are. It is a form of knowing, which I loved. And I think that's what it is. Like, being loved is being known, and I think that's what Kathleen really wants right now, is to feel like she is seen and known in that way. And by being known and being loved belongs to something or someone or somewhere.
That's really beautiful, Jenny. Thank you. So I'll open it up for questions now if anybody has any questions for Jenny. was the first one. It takes a little while. So somebody be brave. Yes.
So I haven't read the book, but it's fascinating hearing you talk about it. I'm wondering, the culture my family comes from, affection is very normal between friends and family members. And I've always thought that it's a huge disservice in America that affection has been sexualized and how harmful that is to us because we need affection like we need water. And I wonder if you took that into consideration while you were writing the book.
100%. It's really wild. Yeah, there's a huge disparity in different cultures of what is allowed as touch. And they did studies where even just like watching people sit at McDonald's and like people in France like touch like 50% more than Americans did. It's just, that's just like very normal day-to-day touch. And I do think part of that is like here, I don't know why, it might be, I don't know, my mind went a million ways. I'm not going to conjecture as to why, but here I feel like touch is really only allowed like in family in like a maternal context or like a sexual context. Like platonic touch really is de-emphasized, and like it's actually like discouraged. It's like it's scrubbed from like teacher-child relationships, from like healthcare situations. It's really, I think that's part of why the Surgeon General right now calls America going through an epidemic of loneliness. It's just like we've built these taboos about what is allowed touch-wise. And it's so innocuous. I mean, it's so not just more innocuous, it's healing. So that's really heartbreaking. And that's part of, I think, what I saw too with looking at cuddle services where people needed it. Like more often than not, it was self-identified straight men who were seeking services because these are the demographics where it's like even more condemned to touch platonically. And so you see it, like, I think we're all suffering from it, but especially certain groups are suffering from touch only being sexual.
Other questions? Should I ask another question? Okay, I will ask another question. Do you feel like this is a coming-of-age story? And if so, whose coming-of-age story?
Yes.
That's a short question.
It's a coming-of-age story, but I also think it's a Saturn return story. I think everyone's coming of age in some way in this book. Her mom is finally, she wants to have a bachelorette party. She wants to like sort of like live out this narrative of, going to Vegas and riding off into the sunset with her boo that she didn't get to do the first time around. So in that sense, she's like sort of coming into herself and coming of age. You see a couple friends in her life also coming of age in the sense that they're finally being able to pursue what they want to pursue, whether it be music and going on tour or, going to law school. And Kathleen, by comparison, feels really stuck, and she's like, when is it my turn? But for her, it's like, it's about to come, I think. It's just her Saturn return. And for people who don't know, it's like when you're 28, 29, and everything goes to shit, and you have to like refigure it all out. Wonderful.
Yes, go ahead.
What was the hardest part about writing this book?
Ooh, all of it was hard. I think the hardest part, honestly, was the mother-daughter relationship and getting that right, and always feeling like I wasn't actually capturing the full complexity of it, because so much is happening in a mother-daughter interaction. Like there's so many decades of history there, and misunderstanding and learned narratives that you kind of like lock into, and like it's hard to put on the page because you have to like make up those histories for these characters or else it doesn't land. It's not just, oh, someone said something mean and someone said something mean back. It's like, why did they say that? What is this conjuring up from like every other time they've had this sort of interaction? What do they both feel? Do they acknowledge that they've like willfully been mean to each other? How do they react? But, can they break out of that pattern? What happens if they can? What happens if they can't? Where's the guilt? Like, there's just so much, and it doesn't really become fully fleshed until that history is there. So that was hard.
Kind of off that question, which is also, what was the most cathartic part of the book?
Maybe I'm like, my mind is immediately going to the rave. That was really cathartic because it was really joyful, and I think it was really challenging in a way that scenes usually, like, lots of scenes are emotionally challenging to write, but the rave scene was like physically challenging to write, in the sense of like I really needed to get my mind and body in that space and enter the sort of like fragmented, warped funhouse mirror way of thinking that happens in that environment, which is hard to do when you're completely sober.
How did you do it?
I just thought really hard. It was actually really interesting because at one point, like at a certain point, like it kind of felt like, oh, I feel like I'm there, and like maybe I've like transcended needing any substance, and like I just can will myself there.
Writing is magic.
Well, they also say like, writing is magic, and they also say like a certain point like of like meditation is like taking a certain dose of shroom. So it's like I think all those synapses are there.
Well, I was sort of thinking about this, sort of back to my question about the body, which is just, it's funny because Kathleen is somebody who's like very intellectual and has come to this field like through a research, like an intellectual level. Like the first time she's cuddled, she's thinking about like how her brain is processing touch, right? And then yet what this book is trying to do is give us an actually very physical experience through the least physical and most abstract medium possible, which is words. So how did you get around that? That seems like a very challenging situation to set yourself up for.
Wait, can you repeat the question?
It's kind of like, this book feels very embodied. This book, maybe I'm just asking you the same question again. But just like, this book feels so embodied, and you're using such an abstract medium in order to do that. How are you able to get into this character's body and render that so convincingly on the page? It feels like you're getting that sensation when you're reading it.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is, I feel a lot of it is the emotional like timbre of a scene also, because like that will affect what your body is feeling and how you're just processing information differently. So it was about like tuning into what every character is feeling at that moment and how something might land, because we're all in our good moods, and like something will happen and we can brush it off, and like maybe you don't feel that in your body as deeply. But if something's going on, or if it's the last straw, or if she's thinking about something and this happens to trigger that, then like that will land in a completely different way, both just in her reactive thoughts, but also how that might make her feel in her gut.
Yeah, great. Other questions? We probably have time for a couple more.
Do you have a question? Hi, great. Okay, so you were talking about how it's not so much of like a coming of age story as it is a Saturn return story. You're talking about the crazy stuff that often happens in people's lives when they're 27 and 29. Like things hit the fan, like things change in really big ways. But you started writing it in like 2015, so you've kind of gone through that age transition as you're writing it. And I'm wondering, like obviously the life that you lived while writing it has influenced it in some ways, and I'm sure a lot of ways. But what is your takeaway from this book, and like what have you learned from it at the age you are now, having gone through that age, like transition? What's your takeaway, both as the person who wrote it, but also seeing it now as this finished product, and you're now like in your early 30s, and so you're not at that transition anymore, so you're just looking at it everything you've gone through, but also like as a person who wrote it, but seeing it now as this finished thing, like what's your takeaway? What have you learned? What's it about you as you went through that also?
I love that question. Thank you. When you think about how to answer it in less than an hour. Well, I think one thing is that it's taught me and changed a lot about my relationship with my parents, for one, and that's something I've written about in an essay. And because, a lot of my life was a lot like Kathleen's life, where, my parents came here under duress, under very different circumstances that I know, having grown up in the Cultural Revolution and like having a very different relationship to almost everything in the world that you could think of, to music, like you could only hear one song, and food, and like how to procure it, and what is success, and what is stability, and how should a person, everything was different. So being raised here, I think my early experiences were like about throwing that away and not trying to investigate it and just trying to fit in here. And I think being very cruel in the process and being really like not understanding of like why I had certain expectations, or I was, certain behaviors were expected. And I think I would say I'm like been stupid for a very long time. And like in the writing of this book, I was like, starting at 25, 26. And that was really when I was starting to finally interrogate that and like start to know like, oh, okay, what were the disconnects in our understanding and why were we so incomprehensible to each other? And writing this book has helped me start to ask questions and learn personal history that's helped me piece together, okay, why are things a certain way, and why do we have such like a misunderstanding and this like this block between us. So that's been really amazing in terms of like changing how I view our family. It's my dad in the back too. The other thing I'll say is like this is something that I've wanted since 4th grade. Like when I remember like writing in my journal, like I want to write a novel, not knowing what a novel really was. And that's weird to feel like something that you wanted is now here. You think it would just be joy, you know this, but it's not just joy. It's so weird. Yeah, there's like deep gratitude, there's joy, but there's also grief and indifference, and I don't think there's any anger, but you're feeling a lot of things, and you're just sort of like, oh. And this is something I like learned again and again in my life, but I think very pointedly with the book right now is like there's not one thing that's ever gonna make me happy. And that sounds sad, but I actually mean it in a really good way. What I mean is like now I know not to ever put my happipiness in a thing, which sounds trite. I think, but like, yeah, it's very true that I feel okay, I'm gonna say 2 things. On one hand, having the book published and that like spike of joy and happiness in that bubble that I lived in for a little bit is like probably comparable to like, I don't know, eating a really good burger. Does that make sense? But the long experience of like I've like worked on this thing and I get to have events like this and connect with you all and like talk about these things like and just feel like the support and like that is like life-changing, and like that brings me back to it's not just like, oh, this thing happened and I'm happy. It's more like, oh, these are the things that are important to me, like this kind of connection. So it's teaching me that.
Well, that's really wonderful. One last question, and then we're going to say goodnight. I mean, we're not going to say goodnight. Everybody's going to go and buy a book, and then Jenny will sign it for you. Is there one last question to close this up? Yeah, go ahead.
It's not as serious of a question as Mary's, but I really love your writing, and I love all the tactile language in this book. I think it folds nicely into all of the themes and everything that Kathleen is going through, but Jenny, what are some of your favorite like tactile sensations, and also least favorite?
I mean, I love soft things, so like bunnies, lambs, baby fuzz, peaches. Texture-wise, I really love like boba-y textures. Ooh, you know what I really love? This is food. Like a tendon? Is that what it is? It's like kind of like this like chewy, fatty, like almost elastic thing. I love that sensation. I don't like pain. I don't know if there's like any texture or like sensation I'm like, ooh, not unless it's like painful or abrasive, I guess.
I was drawing with chalk on a driveway, and that was a horrible sensation. And it wasn't painful, but it was just so rough. It's just that, yeah, it's like almost nails on a chalkboard.
What are your favorite?
Oh, favorite? Oh, I don't know, like human touch, I guess. I was told that like when you're a new mom, you experience like being touched out, and then I never like I have like infinite skin hunger. Like I can never be touched out. I love being touched. I mean, don't just touch me. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming, everybody. A book for you, a book for your friend. I bet they'll really like this book, and Jenny will be happy to sign them. And thank you so much, Jenny, for writing such a wonderful book.
And Shruti's book is here, both The Archer and A House is a Body. Gorgeous, gorgeous writing. Honestly, just so enthralling. One of my favorite things I read this year.
I hope you're not clapped out yet, because I have a couple of good cues coming up. So I'm just here to say you couldn't have done it better. You guys were fantastic, and thank you so much for sharing your time and talent, and thank you so much. I am just here to let you know that, as they said, you heard it here first, we have books available for purchase. Now is a great opportunity to find one, and Jenny will sign them. I think Shruti will sign them as well. And we do still have some nosh and some drinks behind us. Please do imbibe. And let's give one more hand for both of us.